15,000 years ago, a massive bridge of land emerged from the frozen Bering Sea, connecting two continents in a desolate expanse of tundra. This was the beginning of an epic journey for the first humans to step into North America. This vast, windswept frontier was a world of ice and silence, where survival was the only law and the landscape was sculpted by the unrelenting forces of the Pleistocene. These pioneers were not aimless wanderers. They were masters of their environment, moving with a calculated purpose driven by the shifting migrations of the great Megafauna. Led by seasoned elders, the small band of hunters moved with calculated precision across the frozen wetlands. Their clothing, meticulously stitched from the thick hides of caribou and muskox, offered the only protection against the lethal chill of the Arctic wind. Each step was a testament to human resilience as they navigated rocky outcrops and hidden ice patches. These hunters carried the collective memory of their ancestors, every tool and technique refined over millennia. They were the vanguard of humanity, pushing into a territory where no human foot had ever trod, their eyes constantly scanning for signs of life. The climate of ancient America was a relentless adversary that tested the limits of human endurance. Blizzards could descend without warning, turning the world into a blinding white void where all sense of direction was lost. To survive, the hunters relied on an intimate knowledge of the weather and the terrain, understanding the language of the wind and the subtle shifts in the clouds. Shelters were temporary and fragile, often mere depressions in the snow or lean-tos made from animal skins. Every calorie was precious, and every fire was a hard-won victory against the creeping frost that threatened to consume them. Before the hunters lay the gargantuan tracks of the woolly mammoth, deep depressions in the permafrost that served as a map for their journey. These tracks were more than just signs of prey. They were the heartbeat of the land, signaling the presence of the great beasts that sustained their lives. Following them meant following the promise of food, warmth, and vital materials. A single kill could sustain the group for weeks, providing meat for the belly, ivory for spearheads, and hides for shelter. The hunters studied the age of the prince and the direction of the gate with absolute focus. Weaponry was the pinnacle of their technology, a craft perfected over generations. In the flickering light of a small camp, a master napper worked a piece of high-quality flint, his strikes precise and rhythmic. He was crafting a Clovis point, a fluted stone blade of lethal efficiency designed to be lashed to wooden shafts. These spears were capable of piercing the thick hides of Megafauna, representing the difference between life and death. Each flake of stone removed was a step toward a perfect edge, a sacred tradition passed down to ensure the survival of the lineage in a world of giants. At night, the group gathered to share stories and repair their gear, the social bond acting as the glue that held them together in the vast emptiness. Women and men worked side by side, softening hides with bone scrapers and preparing dried meat for the journey ahead. Children watched intently, learning the skills they would one day need to lead the tribe. In these quiet moments, the weight of the wilderness seemed lighter. The warmth of the community was as vital as the fire itself, providing the psychological strength to face the unknown challenges that awaited them at the next dawn. Finally, the hunters caught sight of their quarry moving across a distant valley. A herd of mammoths moved slowly, their massive tusks gleaming like ivory sickles in the pale sun. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. These were the titans of the Ice Age, towering 3 meters at the shoulder and draped in thick, shaggy hair. The hunters moved into position, their movements fluid and silent as they blended into the terrain. They knew that a direct confrontation was impossible. They had to use the landscape to their advantage, trapping the beasts where their massive size would become a liability. As they moved further south, the geography began to shift into the ice-free corridor, a narrow passage between two colossal continental ice sheets. On one side lay the Cordilleran Glacier, and on the other, the Laurentide. These walls of ice towered kilometers high, creating a wind tunnel effect that chilled the bone and challenged their resolve. The path was treacherous, filled with meltwater lakes and shifting gravel that made every step a hazard. Navigating this corridor required immense courage, as they were effectively walking through a canyon of ice that could shift or collapse at any moment, burying their history. Under the canopy of a million stars, the hunters looked to the heavens for guidance in the dark. Without the light pollution of the modern world, the night sky was a brilliant map of constellations and the Milky Way. These celestial patterns helped them maintain their course as they migrated deeper into the unknown continent. They saw spirits in the stars, weaving a mythology that connected their physical journey to a spiritual one. The silence of the night was profound, broken only by the crackle of a small fire and the distant, haunting howl of a dire wolf across the tundra. As the corridor finally widened, the landscape began to transform before their eyes. The biting winds softened, and the first hints of a more diverse ecosystem appeared in the form of stunted trees and hardy shrubs. The hunters had reached the interior of the continent, a vast, untapped wilderness teeming with life and new opportunities. They were the first humans to witness this world, a land of endless possibility and hidden dangers. Their journey had only just begun, and the footprints they left in the soft earth would eventually lead to the birth of countless civilizations across North America. Emerging from the shadow of the glaciers, the hunters encountered the true masters of the subarctic plains, the woolly mammoths. These massive titans moved in rhythmic unison, their curved tusks slicing through the frigid air like ivory scythes. For the small band of humans, the sight was both terrifying and promising. A single mammoth represented months of survival, meat for food, hides for warmth, and bone for tools. They watched from the tall, golden grasses, their hearts hammering against their ribs. In this moment, the hunters realized that to survive in this new world, they would need to become masters of the hunt. To fell a giant required more than just courage. It required innovation. Around the evening fires, the hunters began to refine their weaponry, giving birth to the iconic Clovis point. Using a technique known as pressure flaking, they chipped away at chert and obsidian, creating razor-sharp, fluted blades designed to penetrate thick hides. The firelight flickered across their concentrated faces as they worked, the rhythmic clack-clack of stone against stone echoing through the encampment. This technological leap was the turning point in their journey, transforming them from scavengers into the apex predators of the Pleistocene landscape. Tracking the herds required an intimate understanding of the earth. The hunters learned to read the stories written in the mud and dust, the depth of a hoofprint, the broken stem of a shrub, and the direction of the wind. They followed the Great Plains' natural corridors, charting the movement of bison and horse species that had never seen a human. Every sign was a clue to the landscape's bounty and its dangers. They moved with a predatory grace, their bodies becoming an extension of the wilderness they traversed, always looking southward toward the horizon's beckoning call. As the seasons cycled, the first summer in the interior brought an explosion of life. The permafrost softened, and the tundra erupted into a vibrant carpet of wildflowers and hardy shrubs. For the first time, The hunters felt the true warmth of the sun on their faces, a stark contrast to the biting winds of the ice corridor. This seasonal shift brought new challenges, as the melting ice turned the lowlands into treacherous bogs. They learned to navigate these wetlands, discovering that the changing environment offered a variety of plant life that would supplement their heavy diet of meat. Water became their primary guide as they reached the headwaters of a massive river system. These silver veins carved through the continent, providing both a source of hydration and a natural highway to follow. Crossing these cold, rushing waters was a test of collective strength. They waded through the currents, holding their precious tools and hides high above their heads. The river was a provider of fish and a magnet for game, but it was also a volatile force that could sweep away the unwary. Respect for the water became a cornerstone of their survival strategy as they pushed further inland. Strategy was born from observation. On a high rocky promontory, the elders of the group surveyed the vast basin below. They studied the natural funnels of the terrain, canyons and ridges that could be used to trap large game. This was the birth of the jump site tactic, a sophisticated hunting method that required perfect timing and cooperation. The wind howled against the stone, but the hunters remained still, their eyes scanning for the dust clouds of a moving herd. From this height, the scale of the continent was staggering, a land of infinite space and silent, watching peaks. Survival was not the work of the hunters alone. The women and children of the band became experts in the local flora, identifying which roots were edible and which berries could heal. They gathered willow bark for pain and cattails for weaving, turning the raw materials of the wilderness into the comforts of a nomadic home. This knowledge was passed down through whispered stories and shared tasks, creating a cultural map of the environment. Every plant had a name and a purpose, weaving the people into the biological fabric of North America, ensuring the group's resilience against the leanest of times. Deep in the woodland fringes, they encountered a creature that defied their previous experiences, the Megatherium, or giant ground sloth. Standing nearly 20 feet tall when upright, these slow-moving behemoths were like living boulders. The hunters watched in awe as the creatures stripped leaves from the highest branches with their massive claws. Unlike the mammoths, these beasts were solitary and less aggressive, yet their sheer size demanded cautious distance. Encountering such alien life reinforced the hunters' sense of wonder and the realization that they were moving through a world that was ancient long before their arrival. The landscape eventually flattened into an ocean of grass, the Great Plains. Here, the horizon felt like a physical weight, stretching infinitely in every direction. The wind was a constant companion, bending the tall grass in rhythmic waves that mimicked the sea. For a people used to the enclosure of mountains and ice, this openness was both liberating and terrifying. There was nowhere to hide, and the weather could turn violent in an instant. They learned to watch the clouds for signs of the great storms that would sweep across the plains, bringing thunder that shook the very foundation of the earth. Seeking refuge from a relentless storm, the hunters discovered a series of limestone caverns carved into a hillside. Inside, the air was still and cool, smelling of damp earth and ancient stone. As they kindled a small fire, the light danced across the smooth walls, providing a natural canvas. Here, they made their first permanent marks on the new world, handprints and simple outlines of the animals they followed. These caves became more than just shelter. They were the first sanctuaries of their spirit, places where their journey was recorded for the shadows to witness, marking the beginning of their ancestral legacy. Leaving the safety of the caverns, the hunters encountered a silver ribbon that split the earth, a massive winding river. Its current was a powerful force, carrying the runoff of melting glaciers from distant, unseen peaks. To the group, this was more than water. It was a living boundary that both provided life and presented a formidable obstacle. They navigated the high bluffs, observing how the water carved deep channels into the sediment. This river was an artery of the continent, attracting waterfowl and smaller prey, offering a brief reprieve from the scarcity they had faced on the high plains. Survival in this new world required more than just skill. It required the Earth's hardest gifts. In a dry, ancient creek bed, the hunters discovered a vein of high-quality chert, its glassy surface shimmering like frozen water under the pale sun. This was a treasure more valuable than meat. They spent days meticulously quarrying the stone, using heavy river cobbles to strike the nodules. Each blow was a calculated risk, a balance of force and precision. The rhythmic clinking of stone against stone became the soundtrack of their camp, signaling their preparation for the unknown challenges waiting further south. In the quiet hours of the evening, an elder sat with a young apprentice, passing down the sacred geometry of the Clovis point. Using a specialized antler tool, the elder demonstrated how to drive a long, thin flake from the base of the stone, the flute. This technique was the hallmark of their culture, a sophisticated design that allowed the point to be securely hafted to a wooden spear. The apprentice watched with intense focus, realizing that this knowledge was the thread connecting his generation to the ancestors. It was a transfer of survival, ensuring the hunt would continue. While scouting through the dense, frost-covered brush, the hunters crossed paths with a pack of dire wolves. These were not the lean predators they knew from the north, but heavy-set, powerful hunters with thick necks and jaws capable of crushing bone. A silent standoff ensued across a shallow ravine. There was no aggression, only a mutual recognition of apex status between two different kinds of survivors. The wolves watched with steady, amber eyes before turning away to follow a different scent. This encounter was a stark reminder. The humans were not the only masters of this ancient land. The golden hues of the plains eventually faded as the first true winter of their southern trek descended. It was not the crushing, eternal ice of the far north, but a biting, wet cold that seeped into the marrow. The sky turned the color of lead, and a fine powder of snow began to dust the tall buffalo grass. The hunters wrapped themselves in heavy bison hides, their breath blooming in the frigid air like ghostly spirits. They moved slower now, conserving every ounce of energy, searching for sheltered valleys where the relentless wind could not reach them. A wide, sluggish creek had frozen over, creating a treacherous glass bridge across their path. The hunters moved with agonizing slowness, testing the thickness of the ice with the shafts of their spears. Every groan and crack of the frozen surface echoed through the silent valley, a heart-stopping sound that threatened a plunge into the lethal, numbing depths. They spread their weight, crawling where the ice looked thinnest, their faces tight with the strain of absolute silence. This crossing was a test of nerves, where a single misstep could mean the loss of a companion and their vital supplies. On the horizon, a dark, pulsing mass appeared. The great herds of bison antiquus. These animals were significantly larger than modern bison, with horns that spanned several feet. The hunters tracked them from the downwind side, staying low in the frost-covered brush to avoid detection. They observed the herd's social structure, identifying the old and the weak for a potential strike. Hunting such a beast required a coordinated effort and perfect timing. The sight of the herd, numbering in the hundreds, promised a bounty of meat and hides if the hunters could execute their plan without error. During a practice throw, a hunter's primary spear struck a hidden rock, shattering the precious Clovis point into useless fragments. The silence that followed was heavy with frustration. In this wilderness, the loss of a tool was a significant setback, representing hours of labor and the depletion of their dwindling stone reserves. He knelt in the cold mud, gathering the sharp shards, his expression a mix of exhaustion and grim resolve. It was a moment that emphasized the fragility of their existence. They were always one accident away from total vulnerability, held together only by their skill and tools. Descending into a sheltered river valley, the group found a microclimate where winter had not yet taken a firm hold. Here, they discovered groves of black walnut trees and patches of hardy tubers. For days, they pivoted from hunting to gathering, filling leather pouches with high-protein nuts and starchy roots. The variety in their diet brought a surge of energy and health to the group. They worked in the dappled sunlight of the valley floor, the heavy canopy above providing a sense of security they had lacked on the open plains. It was a brief, much-needed sanctuary from the elements. As the clouds parted one crisp night, the hunters looked upward at a sky untainted by the fires of civilization. The stars were brilliant, piercing needles of light that formed patterns they used for navigation. They recognized the Great Bear and the path of the Milky Way, which they believed was the road taken by the spirits of their ancestors. Sitting by a low, glowing fire, they pointed out the celestial markers that guided them southward. The stars provided a sense of continuity. No matter how much the land changed, the heavens remained a constant map, anchoring them to their past and their future. The sanctuary of the river valley faded into the distance as the hunters approached a towering limestone gorge. The walls rose like jagged teeth against the gray sky, narrowing their path until only a sliver of daylight remained. The ground here was treacherous, slick with moss and the spray from a churning subterranean stream that emerged from the rock. Every footfall had to be calculated, for the weight of their packs and the exhaustion in their limbs made balance a precarious luxury. The enclosure of the canyon felt like a test, a physical manifestation of the tightening constraints of their environment. Upon emerging from the gorge, the lead scout halted, his eyes fixed on a distant, ephemeral sight. A thin, vertical plume of gray smoke rising from a copse of spruce miles away. It was not a wildfire, but a controlled, steady signal of human presence. The realization that they were not alone in this vast, frozen corridor sent a ripple of unease through the group. They had lived for months believing they were the only survivors in this reach of the world. Now, the landscape felt suddenly crowded, filled with the mystery of an unknown tribe and the uncertainty of a potential encounter. From a high ledge, they looked down upon a creature of nightmare and wonder, a giant ground sloth, its massive bulk stripping the bark from an ancient cedar. The animal was a slow-moving mountain of muscle and shaggy fur, indifferent to the world around it. The hunters watched in silence, their breath hitching. While its size offered a bounty of meat, its immense claws and thick hide presented a danger they were not yet ready to face. It was a reminder of the megafauna that still dominated this land, a scale of life that made their own existence seem small and fleeting. The relentless march took a visible toll on their gear. One evening, the group sat in the lee of a wind-blasted rock, meticulously repairing their moccasins. They used bone needles and sinew threads to patch the holes worn through by miles of gravel and ice. Their clothing, once sturdy, was now a mosaic of repairs, a testament to their endurance. This quiet labor was as vital as the hunt. Without functional footwear, a man would succumb to frostbite within hours. Each stitch was a commitment to the next day's journey, a silent pact to keep moving forward despite the weariness. Luck finally turned in their favor when they discovered a rare obsidian flow near the base of a dormant volcano. The volcanic glass glinted like dark diamonds against the dull gray earth. This was the black gold of the Stone Age, sharper than any flint and capable of being flaked into lethal edges. They spent hours carefully harvesting the best nodules, setting aside the broken shards from their previous failures. This resource was a lifeline. It meant they could replenish their arsenal with points capable of piercing the thickest hides, restoring a sense of lethality to their group that they had lost weeks ago. A sudden change in atmospheric pressure brought the diamond dust, a freezing fog of ice crystals that suspended itself in the air. The world became a shimmering, opaque white, reducing visibility to a few arm lengths. The hunters had to move in single file, each holding the pack of the person in front to avoid being swallowed by the mist. Sounds became muffled and distorted, creating an eerie, sensory-deprived environment. They weren't just fighting the cold anymore. They were navigating a ghost world where the horizon had vanished, forcing them to rely entirely on their internal sense of direction and the physical touch of their kin. As they rested after the fog cleared, an elder pointed northward, his voice a low rasp as he shared stories of the old land, the bridge of earth they had crossed generations ago. He spoke of vast tundras and different beasts, and how the spirits of those who stayed behind still whispered in the wind. These stories served as a bridge of their own, linking their current struggle to a long lineage of survival. It was a moment of cultural anchoring, ensuring the younger hunters understood that their journey was not an accident, but the continuation of a legacy of movement and adaptation. They stumbled upon a mystery in a clearing, a perfect circle of stones, intentionally placed and long since weathered by the elements. It wasn't a campsite, but something more permanent. Perhaps a marker of territory or a ritual site left by a people who had passed through decades before. There were no bones or tools, only the silent stones. This discovery weighed heavily on them. It proved that this land had been walked, named, and understood by others who had since vanished. The hunters stood at the edge of the circle, feeling the weight of the history that preceded their own arrival in this silent wilderness. The character of the land began to shift once more, transitioning from rocky hills to expansive, rolling grasslands. Here, they found the fresh tracks of an ancient bison herd, imprints so deep they held pools of melted snow. The strategy for the hunt had to change. There was no cover here, no trees to hide behind. They would have to use the terrain itself, the dips and swells of the earth, to mask their approach. They began to prep their new obsidian spears, their movements synchronized and silent, preparing for the high-stakes coordination required to bring down a beast 10 times their weight. Reaching the crest of a final massive ridge, the hunters stood paralyzed by the view. Below them stretched the Great Plains, an endless sea of grass and wind that seemed to touch the very edge of the world. It was a landscape of terrifying scale, offering no shelter but infinite possibility. The wind howled across the summit, tugging at their furs. They were the first of their kind to see this particular vista, a gateway to the heart of the continent. The journey north was truly behind them. Ahead lay a new world that would either sustain them or bury them in its vastness. They began the descent, their feet sinking into soil that had never known a human footprint. The transition from the rocky heights to the velvet floor of the plains was disorienting. The grass, taller than a man's waist, rippled like an amber ocean under a restless sky. Every step was a gamble against the unknown, as the horizon offered no landmarks, only the endless, rhythmic swaying of the stalks. They moved in a tight wedge formation, spears leveled, eyes scanning for any ripple in the vegetation that wasn't caused by the relentless southern wind. In the distance, a shadow moved that was far too large to be a bison. A giant, short-faced bear, the apex predator of this epoch, rose from the grass miles away, sniffing the air for the scent of the newcomers. The hunters froze, their breath held in their chests. This was a reminder that while they were predators, they were also prey. The scale of the beast made their obsidian spears feel like mere splinters. They watched until the silhouette vanished back into the swaying reeds, acknowledging the silent hierarchy of the plains. Thirst became their primary concern as the sun climbed higher, baking the open landscape. They followed the flight paths of low-flying birds until they found a hidden sinkhole, a limestone depression where cool, clear water pooled. It was a life-saving oasis, but its edges were littered with the bleached skulls of animals that had come for a drink and met their end. They drank sparingly, wary of the open ground. Here, the lack of cover made them feel exposed to the sky, a feeling of vulnerability they had never experienced in the northern forests. The ground began to vibrate, a low-frequency hum that traveled through the soles of their moccasins before it reached their ears. Over a low rise, the first of the great bison appeared. These were bison antiquus, ancestors of the modern buffalo but standing nearly 8 feet at the shoulder, with horns spanning 6 feet across. They were titans of muscle and fur, grazing with a slow, deliberate grace. The hunters watched from a depression in the earth, overwhelmed by the sheer biomass of the herd, which numbered in the thousands, stretching toward the horizon. Night on the plains brought a cold that was different from the mountains. It was a dry, biting wind that carried the scent of distant rain. Without trees for a windbreak, they dug shallow trenches into the earth, lining them with bison hides to retain their body heat. They dared not light a large fire, fearing it would act as a beacon for predators or stampede the nearby herd. Instead, they sat in the darkness, listening to the symphony of the grasslands, the yips of dire wolves and the constant rhythmic rustling of the endless grass. The morning sky was a bruised shade of purple and slate, indicating an approaching supercell. The hunters recognized the signs: the sudden stillness of the air and the frantic behavior of the local bird life. They had no caves to retreat to, no heavy timber to provide shelter from the coming wrath. They began to lash their belongings together, weighting them down with heavy stones. This was a test of survival in its purest form. The environment itself was turning into an adversary that no spear or flint could hope to defeat. When the storm broke, it was a wall of water and wind that flattened the tall grass in an instant. Lightning arced across the sky in jagged, terrifying branches, illuminating the plains in brief, blinding flashes of white. The hunters lay flat against the earth, clinging to the soil as the world turned into a chaotic blur of noise and motion. The thunder was not a sound, but a physical force that rattled their bones. In the strobe-like light of the storm, they could see the bison herd huddling together, a dark, pulsing mass of endurance. The aftermath of the tempest left the world transformed. The dust had been washed from the air, and the scent of damp earth and crushed grass was overwhelming. As the clouds broke, a pale, cold sun emerged, casting a crystalline light over the sodden landscape. The hunters rose from the mud, shivering but alive. They found the plains had become a network of temporary streams and ponds. The water had brought out a new vibrancy in the flora, and for a moment, the harshness of their journey was replaced by a fleeting, shimmering beauty. The soft mud provided a perfect canvas for tracking. They followed the churned-up earth where the bison herd had shifted during the storm. The trail was easy to follow, but the wet ground made their movement heavy and loud. They had to learn a new way of walking, stepping on the firmer clumps of grass to avoid the suction of the clay. Strategy was debated in hushed tones. They needed to isolate a single animal from the herd, a task that required patience and a deep understanding of the herd's collective psychology and defensive formations. Standing amidst the vastness, a profound psychological shift occurred within the group. They were no longer the mountain dwellers or the forest dwellers of their ancestors. The horizontal scale of the plains had stripped away their old identities. To survive here, they had to become as fluid and enduring as the wind itself. They realized that the hunt was not just about food, it was their initiation into this new world. They looked at their obsidian blades, once symbols of survival, and saw them now as the keys to a kingdom of grass that stretched forever. The air grew thick with the heavy, musky scent of the herd, long before the animals were visible. Thousands of massive bodies exerted a gravitational pull on the landscape, their collective warmth creating a microclimate of low-hanging steam in the cool morning air. The hunters moved in a rhythmic crouch, their senses heightened to the point of agony. Every rustle of the drying grass felt like a thunderclap. They were no longer mere observers of the plains. They were becoming part of its predatory hierarchy, learning to move in the gaps between the bison's thundering heartbeats. A lone sentinel, an ancient bull scarred by decades of survival, stood on a slight rise, his massive head swinging slowly like a pendulum. His dark, wet eyes scanned the horizon for any disruption in the swaying grass. The hunters froze, turning themselves into statues of flint and hide. They understood that to trigger the bull's alarm was to lose the hunt entirely. The standoff was a test of absolute stillness, where the only thing moving was the wind through the bull's matted fur and the rapid pulse in the hunters' throats. The strategy required a grueling low crawl through the drying mud and sharp stalks. They used the natural contours of the earth, sliding through depressions where the water had recently receded. Their hands, calloused and stained by the earth, gripped the shafts of their spears with white-knuckled intensity. The physical toll was immense. Every muscle screamed from the effort of moving without sound. They were ghosts in the landscape, shedding their humanity to adopt the patient, crawling lethargy of the reptile, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim their status as apex predators. In the quiet of the approach, the hunters performed a final check of their gear. The atlatl, a simple but revolutionary tool of leverage, was their most prized possession. They ran their fingers over the smooth wood and the meticulously carved bone hooks, ensuring the spear would sit perfectly. This was the pinnacle of Ice Age engineering, a bridge between human strength and the raw power needed to pierce the thick hide of a prehistoric giant. The weight of their survival rested on these few ounces of wood and stone, balanced with mathematical precision. Within the heart of the herd, a different world existed. The bulls circled the perimeter, but the interior was a sanctuary for cows and their amber-colored calves. The hunters observed the tender nudges of the mothers, the way they steered their young away from the softest patches of mud. It was a sobering reminder of the life they were about to interrupt. There was no hatred in the hunters' hearts, only a profound, somber respect for the cycle of energy they were a part of. To kill was to live, a paradox that defined their existence. The lead hunter raised a hand, fingers splayed in a silent language developed over generations. Without a word, the group split into two wings, fanning out to flank the herd's flank. They communicated through slight tilts of the head and the direction of their gaze. The coordination was telepathic, born of years of hunting together in the harshest conditions. Each man knew his role. The drivers would initiate the movement, while the strikers waited in the path of the panicked animals. The tension in the air was palpable, a coiled spring waiting for the release. A sudden shift in the wind carried the scent of the hunters directly into the herd. The reaction was instantaneous. The low hum of grazing stopped, replaced by a sharp, collective intake of breath. The lead bull let out a guttural grunt, a signal of alarm that rippled through the thousands of bodies. The ground began to vibrate with a low-frequency hum as the animals shifted their weight, preparing to bolt. The hunters felt the tremor in their very bones. The earth itself was warning them that the window of stealth had slammed shut. With the element of surprise lost, the hunters transitioned into a tactical sprint. They didn't run at the herd, but alongside it, aiming for a narrow bottleneck formed by a series of ancient, weather-beaten boulders. Their goal was to steer a small subset of the herd into this natural trap. The athleticism of the hunters was on full display. Lean, muscular frames moving with an efficiency that made them seem almost weightless over the uneven ground. They were no longer stalking. They were participating in the frantic, rhythmic dance of the chase, where speed was the only currency. The bottleneck was a jagged ravine, a scar in the earth carved by millennia of seasonal floods. The hunters reached the rim first, their lungs burning, their vision narrowing to the path of the bison. They took their positions among the rocks, looking down into the narrow passage. Below, the sound of hooves intensified into a rhythmic pounding that felt like the earth was being beaten with hammers. The geography of the hunt had been chosen with lethal intent. Here, the size and power of the bison would become their greatest disadvantage in the confined space. The moment of stasis arrived as the first of the bison entered the ravine. For a heartbeat, time seemed to liquefy and slow. The hunter at the center of the line drew back his atlatl, the wood groaning slightly under the tension. He looked into the eye of the led animal, seeing not an enemy, but a mirror of his own struggle to persist. The air was thick with dust and the thrum of ancient power. This was the precipice, the final boundary between the hunger of the past and the survival of the future. Held in a fragile, silent balance, the tension finally snapped as the lead hunter released the dart. The atlatl acted as a lever, magnifying the force of his throw with terrifying precision. The projectile hissed through the air, a blur of wood and sharpened flint cutting through the dust-choked atmosphere of the ravine. This was the moment of no return, where months of tracking and days of waiting culminated in a single, kinetic strike. The silence that had preceded the hunt was shattered, replaced by the sharp whistle of the spear and the sudden panicked realization of the herd below. Below the rim, the ravine transformed into a chaotic corridor of thunder. The lead bison, feeling the impact of the first strike, stumbled, its massive weight shifting unpredictably. The animals behind it, driven by momentum and instinct, collided in a frantic press of fur and horn. The bottleneck had worked. The herd's greatest strength, their sheer numbers, now became a liability. They were trapped in a geological vice, their bellows echoing off the sandstone walls like a rhythmic, ancient drumbeat that signaled the beginning of the end for the prey. From the opposite side of the ravine, a second group of hunters emerged from behind the jagged boulders. Their timing was flawless, the result of a communication system honed over generations. They didn't shout. They moved with a silent, lethal coordination, positioning themselves to prevent the herd from reversing its course. These men were the secondary wave, the anchors of the trap. Their presence ensured that the bison remained funneled toward the narrowest point, where the geography of the land would do the hardest work of the hunt, leaving nothing to chance. For the younger hunters, this was a trial of nerves. Standing on the precipice, the ground vibrating beneath their feet, they had to maintain their focus despite the overwhelming sensory assault. The smell of kicked-up earth and the heat rising from the herd filled their lungs. They watched the elders for cues, learning how to read the chaotic flow of the animals. Every movement had to be deliberate. A single slip on the loose shale could send a man tumbling into the path of a panicked 1,000-pound beast. Survival required both courage and absolute spatial awareness. Dust rose in thick, billowing curtains, obscuring the sun and turning the ravine into a twilight world. Visibility dropped to mere yards, forcing the hunters to rely on their ears and the vibrations of the earth. They could hear the clatter of hooves against stone and the heavy, labored breathing of the bison. In this clouded environment, the hunt became an exercise in intuition. The hunters moved like ghosts through the haze, guided by the memory of the landscape they had studied for days. The atmosphere was heavy, primordial, and thick with the weight of destiny. The lead elder raised his hand, a silent command that rippled through the line of men. He signaled for a shift in the angle of the attack, directing the hunters to focus on the flanks of the trapped group. His experience told him that the herd was beginning to find its footing, and they needed to maintain the pressure to keep the animals contained. This wasn't a reckless slaughter. It was a calculated harvest. Every gesture he made was rooted in a deep respect for the prey and an understanding that their own lives depended on the success of this maneuver. The efficiency of their tools was now the deciding factor. The stone points, crafted from high-quality chert and obsidian, were designed for deep penetration. Each hunter had spent hours knapping these blades, ensuring they were sharp enough to pierce the thick hide and heavy muscle of the bison. As more darts were launched, the mechanical advantage of the atlatl became clear. It allowed the hunters to stay at a safer distance while delivering strikes with enough force to bring down the largest land mammals on the continent. These tools were the bridge between human ingenuity and physical survival. As the momentum of the herd slowed within the bottleneck, the hunters moved in closer, narrowing the circle of the trap. They worked in pairs, one providing cover while the other moved to a more advantageous position. The bison were now mostly stationary, huddled together in a defensive mass. But their sheer power remained a constant threat. The hunters' movements were rhythmic and cautious, a dance of predators around a formidable prey. They were closing the net, ensuring that the energy expended in the chase would result in the sustenance their tribe desperately needed for the coming winter. In the distance, the remainder of the herd that had not entered the ravine disappeared over the horizon, a fading cloud of dust marking their escape. The hunters did not pursue them. Their focus was entirely on the task at hand. There was no room for greed in this environment, only for what could be processed and used. They watched the survivors go with a sense of grim satisfaction, knowing that the continuity of the herd was as important as the success of the hunt. The balance of the ecosystem remained intact, even as the hunters secured their own future. The frantic pounding of hooves eventually subsided, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the exhausted animals and the soft crunch of sand under the hunter's moccasins. The ravine, once a place of terrifying noise, now held a heavy, solemn silence. The hunt was transitioning into its next phase, the arduous work of processing the kill. The adrenaline that had fueled the chase began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Yet in the eyes of the men, there was a spark of relief. The hunger that had haunted their camp would soon be held at bay. The lead hunter stepped forward, his silhouette tall against the jagged canyon walls. He placed a weathered hand upon the flank of a fallen bison, feeling the lingering warmth of the great beast. Around him, the dust began to settle, coating everything in a fine gray powder. This moment of contact was more than a census of the hunt. It was a profound acknowledgement of the life force that would now sustain his people. The silence of the ravine was absolute, broken only by the whistling wind through the high crevices above, marking the successful end of a perilous pursuit. From the mouth of the ravine, the rest of the tribe emerged, their forms appearing like ghosts against the stark landscape. They carried bundles of supplies and additional tools, moving with a practiced efficiency that spoke of generations of survival. There was no celebration, only the quiet, focused energy of a group that understood the urgency of their task. The sun began to dip lower, casting long, dramatic shadows that stretched across the valley floor, signaling that the window for processing the meat before the predators arrived was rapidly closing. Kneeling on the hard-packed earth, the elders began to unwrap their most precious tools. Wrapped in soft buckskin, the Clovis points and scrapers gleamed with a dull, flinty luster. Each stone had been painstakingly flaked to a razor edge, a testament to hours of careful craftsmanship. These were the keys to their survival, the instruments that would transform a fallen giant into food, clothing, and shelter. The hunters watched with respect as the toolmakers inspected the edges, ensuring every blade was ready for the heavy labor that lay ahead in the fading light. The work began with a systematic precision. Methodically, the tribe divided into small teams, each assigned to a specific task. There was a rhythmic quality to their movements as they worked in the deepening gloom. The hide was carefully separated from the meat, a process that required steady hands and sharp eyes. Every scrap of the animal was valued. Nothing would be left to the scavengers if they could help it. The atmosphere was one of intense concentration, the only sounds being the soft scrape of stone on hide and the occasional whispered instruction. In the center of the ravine, a small fire was sparked to life, its orange glow a sharp contrast to the blue hues of the approaching twilight. A thin ribbon of smoke spiraled upward, seeking the open sky. The fire provided more than just warmth. It was a beacon of safety in an increasingly dark world. As the flames grew, they cast flickering shadows against the rock walls, transforming the ravine into a temporary sanctuary. The heat was a welcome relief to fingers numbed by the cooling air, a small comfort in the midst of the grueling work. As the processing continued, temporary lean-tos were constructed using large branches and spare hides to shield the workers from the rising wind. These fragile structures were the first signs of a domestic camp in the wilderness, a brief foothold in a harsh environment. The wind began to howl through the narrow passages of the canyon, carrying the scent of frost and distant storms. The hunters tightened their furs, their breath visible in the cooling air. They knew the weather could turn at any moment, and speed was now as much an ally as the stone in their hands. The sorting of materials was a meticulous process. Meat was sliced into thin strips for drying, while bones were cleaned and set aside to be fashioned into needles, awls, and handles. The thick hides were stretched out, weighted down by heavy stones to prevent them from shrinking as they dried. Every part of the bison was a resource: the sinew for thread, the stomach for water vessels, and the horns for spoons. This was the economy of the Ice Age, where wealth was measured in the ability to utilize every gift the land provided. The temperature dropped sharply as the sun vanished completely behind the western peaks. A biting chill settled into the ravine, a reminder of the unrelenting Ice Age climate that governed their lives. The hunters' movement slowed as fatigue began to set in, but they did not stop. The stakes were too high for rest. They worked by the light of the fire and the pale moon rising above the canyon rim. Each person played their part in the survival of the whole, a collective effort that had allowed their ancestors to cross continents and endure the unendurable. A moment of quiet reflection passed between the oldest hunter and a young boy who was watching the process with wide, observant eyes. The elder pointed to the landscape, then back to the bison, conveying a silent lesson about the cycle of life and the debt owed to the earth. There was a spiritual weight to the air, a sense of belonging to something much larger than themselves. This wasn't just a kill, it was a sacred exchange. The boy nodded, his face illuminated by the fire, absorbing the gravity of their existence in this beautiful, brutal land. As night fully claimed the ravine, the firelight danced against the ancient stones, casting giant, flickering silhouettes of the tribe against the canyon walls. The work would continue long into the night, the hunters fueled by the knowledge that their families would be fed. Above them, the stars emerged in a brilliant, cold canopy, indifferent to the struggles of the small band of humans below. The ravine was now a pocket of heat and life in a frozen world, a testament to human resilience and the enduring bond between the hunter and the hunted. Dawn broke across the tundra as a thin, pale line of gray. The hunters, weary from the night's labor, began the arduous task of loading the processed bison meat. Every scrap was precious, packed into hide bundles and lashed with sinew. The frost of the morning clung to their hair and furs, a shimmering layer of ice that sparkled in the first weak rays of light. They moved with a practiced rhythm, their breaths forming thick clouds in the frigid air. The success of the hunt had secured their future, but the journey home was just beginning. To transport the immense weight across the rugged terrain, the hunters constructed sturdy travois from cedar poles and bison hide. Each frame was tested for strength, ensuring it could withstand the jarring impacts of the rocky ground. The group coordinated their efforts, tethering the heavy loads to their shoulders. They were no longer just hunters. They were laborers of the wild, carrying the lifeblood of their clan. The sheer physical toll was evident in their strained faces, yet a sense of grim determination pushed them forward. The path ahead was treacherous, winding through canyons and over frozen plains. The trek led them along a narrow, wind-swept ridge overlooking a vast glacial valley. Below, the ice sheets groaned and cracked, a reminder of the shifting world they inhabited. The hunters moved in single file, their silhouettes stark against the blinding white of the distant snowfields. High-altitude winds whipped around them, threatening to steal their footing. Every step was a calculated risk, a dance between survival and the abyss. The oldest hunter led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for the subtle landmarks that would guide them safely through the maze of the high country. A meltwater stream, carved deep into the permafrost, blocked their path. Its waters were black and churning, carrying chunks of jagged ice downstream. The hunters paused, evaluating the crossing. They chose a spot where the banks were stable, using their spears as stabilizers against the current. The freezing water numbed their legs instantly, a biting reminder of the environment's hostility. They worked in pairs, ensuring the heavy meat bundles did not get swept away. In this world, a single mistake, a slip or a lost pack, could mean the difference between life and starvation for their families. As the second day of travel waned, they found shelter beneath a massive rock overhang. The stone walls provided a natural windbreak against the sharpening gale. While some tended to the heavy loads, others gathered sparse scrub brush for a small, controlled fire. They weren't just resting. They were maintaining their gear, checking the lashings on their bundles, and repairing worn moccasins. The quiet hum of the group was punctuated only by the crackle of the flames and the distant howl of the wind. This temporary sanctuary offered a moment to breathe before the final push toward the winter camp. Under the shelter of the overhang, the hunters turned their attention to their tools. One man meticulously flaked a piece of obsidian, the sharp edges catching the firelight like black glass. This wasn't just maintenance, it was a ritual of preparedness. The stone spoke to him through the vibration of each strike, a technique passed down through countless generations. A sharp blade was as vital as the food they carried. Around him, others used bone needles to stitch tears in their clothing, reinforcing their defenses against the cold. Every action was a testament to the sophisticated technology of the era. Vigilance was their constant companion. From a high vantage point, the young boy spotted movement on a distant ridge, a solitary, saber-toothed cat, its tawny coat blending with the dry grasses. The predator was tracking them, drawn by the scent of the bison meat. The hunters didn't panic. They had lived alongside these giants for ages. They tightened their formation, keeping their spears at the ready. It was a silent standoff across the valley, a mutual acknowledgement of two apex predators navigating the same harsh reality. The tension was thick, a reminder of the intricate food web of the Ice Age. The sky turned a bruised purple as a massive storm front rolled in from the north. Within minutes, the visibility vanished, replaced by a blinding wall of swirling snow. The hunters huddled together, using their heavy hide bundles as a makeshift wall against the blizzard. They remained motionless to conserve body heat, their world shrinking to the few feet of space between them. The wind shrieked through the canyon, a primal force that tested their resolve. In the absolute whiteout, they relied on their collective strength, waiting for the fury of the Ice Age to pass so they could continue their journey. When the storm finally broke, the landscape had been transformed into a featureless white expanse. The sun emerged, cold and distant, casting long blue shadows across the fresh drifts. Navigation now required a deep knowledge of the land's hidden contours. The elder hunter pointed toward a distant, uniquely shaped peak, the Stone Sentinel, which served as their primary guide. They navigated by the subtle tilt of the earth and the memory of the stars they had seen before. Slowly, the group began to break trail through the knee-deep snow, their progress slow but steady as they neared their goal. At last, the familiar silhouettes of the winter settlement appeared in the distance. Smoke rose in thin blue ribbons from the subterranean lodges, a sight that brought a wave of relief to the exhausted hunters. As they descended into the valley, the community emerged to greet them. The return of the hunters meant survival for another season. There were no grand celebrations, only the quiet, profound satisfaction of a task completed. The meat would be shared, the stories of the hunt would be told, and the cycle of life in ancient America would continue, resilient and unbroken against the backdrop of the ice. Inside the subterranean lodge, the air is thick with the scent of cedar smoke and curing hides. The hunters settle into the sunken living space, the earth's natural insulation providing a sanctuary against the biting cold outside. Firelight dances across the curved timber supports, casting long, rhythmic shadows that mimic the movement of the spirits they believe inhabit the wild. This is the heart of their world, a confined, flickering space where the harsh realities of the Pleistocene are momentarily held at bay by the warmth of community and the promise of a meal. The distribution of the hunt's bounty is a silent, ritualistic process governed by ancient kinship ties. Every portion of the mammoth is utilized. Nothing is squandered in this land of scarcity. The elder women oversee the division, their hands moving with practiced efficiency as they set aside the choice cuts for the elderly and the young. It is a moment of profound equity, where the survival of one is inextricably linked to the survival of the collective. The tension of the journey dissolves into a quiet focus on the essential tasks of communal nourishment. Beyond the meat, the hunt provides the raw materials for future survival. In a corner of the lodge, a craftsman begins to work with the fresh sinew, stripping the long, tough fibers that will eventually become bowstrings and sewing thread. Beside him, another hunter examines a large mammoth tusk, contemplating the ivory's grain before shaping it into a new projectile point or a sewing needle. These artifacts are the technology of the era, crafted with a precision that rivals modern tools. Every scrape of flint against bone is a step toward the next season's endurance. As the night deepens, the elder hunter begins to speak, his voice a low, rhythmic hum that transcends the simple retelling of facts. He recounts the journey not just as a physical trek, but as a spiritual dialogue with the land and the stone sentinel. The younger generation listens intently, memorizing the landmarks and the behavior of the prey through his words. This oral map is their most precious inheritance, a mental geography that will guide them when the physical trails are buried under feet of fresh snow. The fire reflects in their wide, attentive eyes. The children watch the adults with a mix of awe and burgeoning understanding. They see the toll the hunt has taken, the exhaustion etched into the faces of their fathers, and the scars of the environment on their gear. They begin to grasp that their existence is a fragile thread, held together by the skill and bravery of the hunters. In these quiet moments, the mantle of responsibility begins to shift as the youth prepare themselves for the day they will step out into the white void to provide for the lodge in their own right. Outside the lodge, the wind begins to howl again, but the sound is muffled by the thick earth and heavy hide coverings. The settlement is a series of mounds in the snow, barely visible to any predator that might be prowling the valley. These people have become masters of invisibility, blending into the landscape rather than trying to conquer it. Their footprint on the earth is light, yet their presence is a testament to human adaptability. They are a part of the ecosystem, as much a fixture of the Ice Age as the permafrost and the glaciers. As dawn approaches, the cold light of the sun begins to creep over the horizon, illuminating the vast, silent tundra. The hunters have secured enough food to last several weeks, but they know the respite is temporary. The climate is shifting. The great ice sheets are beginning their slow, agonizing retreat, and the world they know is on the cusp of a profound transformation. They do not know the geological names for these changes, but they feel the difference in the winds and see it in the changing migration patterns of the herds they follow. The legacy of these hunters will eventually be buried under layers of sediment and forgotten by the march of time. Their stone points and bone needles will wait in the dark earth for millennia, silent witnesses to a struggle for survival that modern humans can scarcely imagine. To find these artifacts is to touch the pulse of a forgotten era, a time when humanity stood on the edge of the world and refused to yield. These tools are the tangible remnants of a people who mastered the most extreme environment the planet has ever offered. The story of the Ice Age hunters is not one of conquest, but of endurance. It is a narrative written in footprints across the snow and in the shared heat of a communal fire. They were the pioneers of a continent, the first to map the rivers and the first to name the peaks. Their spirit lives on in the resilience of the human species, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds and a frozen world, the drive to protect one's kin and secure a future remains the most powerful force in nature. As the sun sets on this chapter of human history, the vast wilderness of ancient North America remains silent and indifferent to the struggles of those within it. The stars begin to emerge, the same stars that guided the hunters home, twinkling over a land of ice and shadow. The cycle of the hunt, the storm, and the return continues. These lost hunters of the Ice Age fade into the mists of prehistory, leaving behind only the echoes of their courage and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The ice remains, but the flame of life burns on.